Here in the United States, the big day has dawned. In-person voting is now underway in America's midterm elections. President Joe Biden says democracy itself is on the ballot today. Democrats are hoping to keep control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. But given the state of the economy and the precedents of political history here, the White House can expect to lose some ground at least in the House and possibly in the Senate as well. Biden and other Democratic Party campaigners, including former President Barack Obama, have insisted the future of democracy itself is at stake, given that so many Republican candidates today, more than 50% of them in several surveys, have embraced former President Donald Trump's entirely false claims that American elections are fraudulent. Opinion polls suggest we're in for a long process as the votes are counted. Most surveys indicate the Republicans can expect to take control of the House of Representatives, but the US Senate is on a knife edge, with several close races in key battleground states neck and neck. The entire House of Representatives is up for grabs today, along with 1/3 of the Senate and the keys to 36 governors' mansions all over the country. Losing control of one or both houses on Capitol Hill will dramatically restrict Biden's ability to advance his legislative agenda and could leave him a lame duck in the White House for what he hopes are the remaining 2 years of only his first term in office. He could still use executive orders to advance his plans, but they are limited in what they can achieve. A poor showing in the midterms will also raise fresh questions about whether Biden can seriously plan to run for the presidency again in 2 years' time. The president's last campaign rally took place yesterday in the state of Maryland.
You got one day until one of the most important elections. You've heard this time and again. I almost feel guilty repeating it. Our lifetimes are going to be shaped by what happens the next year to 3 years. It's going to shape what the next couple decades look like.
A solid display from Republicans today will give a huge boost to former President Donald Trump. He's endorsed scores of candidates in races all over the country and portrayed himself as the leader of the opposition in a country where that title does not formally exist. Despite there being no evidence of widespread voter fraud, Republicans all over the US have embraced the former president's conspiracy theories. In Ohio last night, the former president made it clearer than ever before that as soon as this election is over, he will launch a fresh bid to return to the Oval Office in 2024.
This is the year we're going to take back the House, we're going to take back the Senate, and we're going to take back America. And in 2024, most importantly, we are going to take back our magnificent White House. I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
That announcement in Florida could come as counting is still underway to determine the results of closely fought contests in these midterm elections. And it's also a fresh challenge to the Department of Justice, widely reported to be considering bringing criminal charges against Trump for his role in the January the 6th uprising on Capitol Hill last year. Meanwhile, billionaire Tesla CEO and now Twitter owner Elon Musk is encouraging people to vote Republican. He has pinned the tweet that you are seeing on your screens. Musk qualified his recommendation by saying that shared power curbs the worst excesses of both parties. His appeal was directed to independent voters, and independent voter turnout could be the deciding factor during these midterm elections. Voter turnout in the US has been close to 60% for presidential elections in recent decades, but only around 45% during midterms. But there was massive early voting, and that suggested a larger than usual number by the time polling closes tonight. For more on all of this, I am very glad to be joined today by WION's North America correspondent Susan Tehrani, who is, of course, live for us in New York. So, Susan, an absolutely massive day unfolding across the United States as polls open, as the sun moves from the east to west. There's no guarantee that by this time tomorrow, we're fully going to know the outcome of these elections.
Absolutely. It is going to be a nail-biter of a night for sure, but you're correct that we are not going to possibly, most likely, not know the result of the elections. One reason for that is going to be Pennsylvania, which has been really a neck-and-neck race between, at least in the Senate, Mehmet Oz and the Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman at this point. And that's going to be, a swing state, a purple state that we're going to be watching. But then there are states, for example, like New Hampshire that we'll be watching closely. If earlier in the night a state like New Hampshire perhaps decides to turn red, at least in the, Senate section of the voting, then we might get sort of a picture of where things are heading, although we might not really have an answer. But as far as a clear-cut answer, we might even, brace ourselves for going all the way into December. Absolutely.
And Susan, if this is as close as we expect, and we see recounts and possibly even the need for runoffs in some locations that could take weeks before they're held, I mean, given the prevailing political temperature in this country, that's going to be an absolute pressure cooker, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you mentioned, in what you were just saying earlier, the level of polarization on the one hand, the distrust and mistrust, not only in the previous election cycle, the presidential election, but also really at a time when we're expecting more likely than not an announcement by former President Donald Trump. November 15th, that's not far away. It's about a week from now. And then you also have the results being up in the air for the midterm. A pressure cooker is perhaps the best way to describe the political climate, probably, if we don't know what's going to happen with the results of the midterm. But I think everyone is bracing themselves for that climate on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think the American people are also hoping that they'll get some kind of understanding again as the results come in for some of these states, which direction Washington is going to lean towards. But I think when it comes to the politics of it, when it comes to the media circus, for a lack of a better word, yes, we're in for a long haul for sure.
And a long night for sure. Susan Tehrani live for us on the streets of New York City today. Thanks very much indeed for that. Also joining us today, Raymond Vickery, a senior associate and Wadhwani chair in US-India policy studies at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington, D.C. Mr. Vickery, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the program today. America used to argue that its democracy was a shining beacon on the top of a hill that the rest of the world could emulate. It may well be that the events of the hours that lie ahead will once again suggest that America is in our rearview mirror.
Well, thanks very much for having me. What you say has some truth in it, in the sense that democracy really is on the ballot, and this is very important for the two greatest democracies in the world, the United States and India. There's so many things that the U.S. and India need to cooperate on: democratic values, rule of law, what happens with China, what happens in Ukraine, climate, and so forth. So it's very important for the relationship. I believe that thus far, and knock on wood, the U.S. democracy has stood the test. We stood the test in 2020, where people who were actually Trump appointees stood up and said, no, he lost. Now the question is whether or not we can maintain that integrity of elections. And as has been pointed out, this is a very attenuated and very difficult circumstance. But I have every hope that we're going to come through and be able to continue to work very closely with India in a democratic fashion.
And what's at stake in foreign policy terms in these elections, particularly as far as Southeast Asia is concerned? How much could change if the Republicans capture a majority, not just in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate as well?
Well, I think that you've already seen signs in the Republican House of Representative members that they are very wary of continuing support for Ukraine. They are not completely attentive to the kinds of incursions that China has in Arunachal Pradesh. The existential issue of climate change, you have a number of climate change deniers, certainly people who do not support the kind of movement that we need from fossil fuels to renewables. So that is very important. I think that in regard to matters which really touch many Indians who want to move back and forth between the United States and India, which both countries need, there are people who are anti-immigration across the board. So these kinds of issues will be impacted, but the basic and most important impact will be deadlock. If you have a House of Representatives and a Senate which are intent upon destroying Joe Biden and not attentive to these broader issues, that very much affects the well-being of the United States, of India, and indeed the entire world.
Raymond Vickery of the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being with us on the program today.
Thanks for having me.